A couple weeks ago, I reviewed all of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist Ace monsters, and to my surprise, there's actually a couple spots on that list that people didn't seem to agree with. Namely, a lot of people thought that Flame Wingman was going to be Jaden's Ace monster, and that's obviously up for debate. And then a lot of people also said that Firewall Dragon was not an Ace monster, and that actually Decode Talker should have been the monster that I reviewed. Now, I do not watch the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes. I announced that in the last video. I'm just reviewing these cards for their competitive validity. However, I do understand that there is some debate about these cards, so where I'm going to get these cards is just online. I'm just looking online what other people called Ace monsters, and it seems like in the case of the rival Ace monsters that there's a more coherent list of them, not so much of these debate cards that seem to be in there. However, with that last video, I also sort of noticed that I think the Ace monsters, at least from what I can tell, are all supposed to have 2,500 attack, and in the case of the rival Ace monsters, it seems like they all have 3,000 attack. So part of the reason that I didn't put cards like Flame Wingman on there and Decode Talker on there is because it seems like they didn't really go in order of all the other ones and their criteria that they have to be Ace monsters. However, I can't really say too much about how often they are played in the anime because once again, I don't really watch the anime. Anyway, one of the most highly requested things in that comment section was to review the rival Ace monsters, so that's what we're doing today, starting off with the one, the only Blue Eyes White Dragon. When we originally talked about Dark Magician in the first installment of this series, I mentioned that one of the biggest issues with Dark Magician is that there's no reason to play it over Blue Eyes, and that is absolutely true, and even to this day, for different reasons of course, Blue Eyes as a deck and as a strategy is a lot better off than Dark Magician, but Blue Eyes is one of those very few cards in the history of the game that not only was good way back when, because it was bigger than Dark Magician, it was the biggest monster you could summon pretty much without any buff spells, it was really good back in the day in old school Yu-Gi-Oh! But it also saw a ton of play in 2016, obviously winning the World Championship, which is a big deal, although World Championships are a little different because they do have their own specific format that only happens at that event. But even after it won Worlds, it continued to top events for months to come, and it was particularly good when Pot of Desires came out. It's one of the best strategies out there that can play Pot of Desires, which is kind of interesting. But even between those two benchmarks, there are tons of cases where the Blue Eyes engine was played competitively. Most notably in Mythic Rulers, it was a popular choice with trade-in and Cards of Consonance, but it saw tons of play in different Exodia variants and some early Shadal lists as well. Pretty much Blue Eyes has been all over the place, which is a pretty stark contrast from the Dark Magician decks that really never came to be competitive, unlike Blue Eyes, which actually was a pretty dominant force for a variety of formats and a variety of decks, which I think is really cool, and it's also one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, Yu-Gi-Oh! Card in existence. So yeah, Blue Eyes, very competitive in a lot of different time periods, which I think is really cool, way better than Dark Magician, obviously. Armed Dragon level 10 is in a really interesting spot. On one hand, it looks really cool and also has several printings that collectors really want to hold on to. It has the dual terminal printing that people want, it has the ultra rare printing that people want. There are multiple versions of Armed Dragon level 10 that people really do want to collect. However, despite the fact that the card is a effect monster and Blue Eyes is a normal monster, Blue Eyes just ends up being a lot better than this because sadly, Armed Dragon level 10 is way too difficult and way too slow to actually summon, and even when you do finally summon this thing by tributing an Armed Dragon level 7, the payoff isn't worth it. Don't get me wrong, it's cool that Armed Dragon level 10 turns any card in your hand into a Raigeki, but when you compare this card to cards like Blue Eyes, which even though they don't have a lot of effects, they also don't have a lot of restrictions, you see why Armed Dragon level 10 just was not good enough even for old school GX era Yu-Gi-Oh! This card is just way too hard to summon and the payoff is not very good. Waiting for Armed Dragon level 7 is already a chore. I've kind of made an entire video talking about why level monsters aren't that good, but Armed Dragon level 10 also suffers because not only is it a level monster, it's not a level monster that you normally rank up into like all the others, because you actually have to hard draw Armed Dragon level 10 to tribute an Armed Dragon level 7. That is way different than most of the level monsters out there, if not all of them. I don't know off the top of my head if every single one doesn't have this on it, but most of them just rank up into the bigger levels. This one you actually have to tribute the level before it. That is just extremely extremely inefficient. Even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! When we have all the draw power that we have, this card is just not worth it. However, it does look really cool and collectors do want to have it, so that's kind of cool, but overall, as far as competitiveness, Armed Dragon level 10 falls flat. If you weren't playing back when Duelist Genesis was first released, it may surprise you that Red Dragon Archfiend was actually a staple extra deck monster, but that's actually true, because Red Dragon Archfiend, while its effect might not seem that crazy nowadays, it was a fairly efficient board clear, especially to an opponent that was trying to turtle up and set a whole bunch of cards in defense position. It was an out to cards like Spirit Reaper and Arcana Force the Fool. This thing outed a whole bunch of sort of turtle cards that people commonly played way back in the day, even though this card has a pretty hefty restriction on it where it blows up your monsters if they don't attack, and that definitely can hurt you in the long run. The fact of the matter is that as a one-of staple in a lot of early Synchro extra decks, Red Dragon Archfiend was actually a pretty efficient tool for dealing with some awkward boards, because back in the day we didn't have Synchro monsters like Scrap Dragon or, well, we had Black Ghost Dragon when it's level 7. We didn't have as many sort of destruction-based Synchro monsters that were readily available, and when Synchros first came out, the most important level was level 8. It's not that Black Ghost Dragon was impossible to make, but most of the early Synchro decks were based on summoning Krebins and tuning it with Destiny Hero Malicious to make a level 8 Synchro monster, so Red Dragon Archfiend came in handy quite a bit. This card hasn't seen play in a while though, for the reasons that I just said, and actually there are several retrains of Red Dragon Archfiend that have seen play, actually 2 of them, which is kind of interesting as well, the fact that this card has been retrained twice, and both of them have power crept each other. So we had Hot Red Dragon Archfiend and also Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, which are just infinitely better than this card because they pop things on the field that aren't necessarily in defense position. But I think Red Dragon Archfiend is a card that a lot of people that played back when Duelist Genesis was around will remember for a long time, because it was an interesting piece of removal that we don't really see a lot of anymore. Obviously that's because not many people actually play monsters in defense position, but when this card came out it was pretty good, and I think it's worth mentioning that. No matter which way you spin it, Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon isn't a very good card, and then also the deck surrounding it, the Galaxy or the Photon strategy, isn't very good either. And I know there are some fans of that, and I'm just sort of saying the hard truth here if you're a fan of the strategy. However, I do want to commend Konami on several examples of good card design, both in function and in lore, with Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon. For example, in terms of function, I think it's really cool that they made a boss monster like this that can immediately special summon itself instead of the clunky tribute summon method that they could have easily just left this card with. I think it's cool, even if the summoning requirement of this card is a little too steep for the payoff that it gives. I think it's cool that they have it on there. And then from a lore standpoint, I really commend the fact that this card does technically directly counter Exceed monsters, and I think that's something that really was supposed to happen in the show, and it's cool to see that it happened on the card, the physical card, as well. I think that's really neat. However, this card did not see much competitive success, and even in those Galaxy Photon strategies, the reason those decks are even playable isn't really due to the power level of Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon. To my knowledge, they play this card, but the reason they play it is more for its name and level, not so much the actual on-field effect, especially in 2018 right now. People aren't really trying to summon Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon and not use it for a rank 8. However, that deck is a fun casual strategy, and this card's existence does make that deck work, so I do want to commend it once again for giving the game a fun casual strategy. However, yeah, this card did not see any competitive play outside of a couple regional tops way back in the day, and even then this wasn't really the most important card of those strategies. Many of the other tools in the Galaxy Eyes and the Photon arsenals were a lot more important than this card, but I do think the card from a design standpoint and from a lore standpoint is pretty cool, even if it's pretty bad in competitive play. I mentioned at the start of this video that I haven't really watched any of the Yu-Gi-Oh animes besides the original series, and I'm bringing that up again because on all accounts that I've found, DDD Doom King Armageddon is the rival ace monster of that era. However, I am like dumbfounded because this card is so ridiculously bad, even in the context of just a rival ace monster. This card just seems horrible. I mean, the pendulum effect is irrelevant. Most of the monster effect is irrelevant as well. The only like slightly good effect this card has is that it cannot be destroyed by spell and trap card effects that do not target it. That protects it from like Torrential Tribute and Regeki and Dark Hole, but all the other effects in this card seem really, really bad. So I guess this is what the rival ace monster was. I never even heard of this card before I made this video, which is a little unheard of because I've heard of a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but this one I have never seen in my entire life. But apparently it is the rival ace monster of that series, and as I've just described, the card is horrible. If there is another card that is you guys think is more of the rival ace monster, for that series, please let me know and I can maybe give my feedback in the comments on that card. But if it is this card, this is laughable at best. I can't even believe that this is what they chose for that rival ace monster because it is so bad. Luckily, we are actually going to end on a high note, and that is BORRELOAD Dragon. This card is incredible. I don't know a lot about the rocket strategy. Pretty much no one plays it even as a rogue deck, but BORRELOAD Dragon has pretty much found its way in every single extra deck that's playing Link monsters, not only the ones that are playing Scapegoat, which obviously is powerful because Scapegoat's a one-card BORRELOAD, but even in the decks like Altergeist, even in the decks that just don't play a lot of Link monsters, they want to play BORRELOAD because this card is so cool. It has that attack modification effect that your opponent can't respond to. There's lots of neat tricks you can do with that. It's a big monster. It has good Link arrows. It steals cards. BORRELOAD Dragon is one of my favorite Link monsters, and I think it'll be at least a year before the card is completely power crept out of the game. Even the new BORREL Sword Dragon that's coming out doesn't entirely power creep BORRELOAD because they both do different things. This card can out almost any monster in the game, almost like a kaiju, because it has non-targeting stealing, and that's really cool. I just love this card so much. I want to put it in every extra deck that I'm doing, and I think it's a really great example of a good Link monster from a card design standpoint, and also a way to use the arrows that Link monsters have in an interesting and unique way. So I love BORRELOAD Dragon. It's a really popular competitive card, and it's also a card that I think won't be power crept for a long time. Anyway though, that is the last monster in our rival ace monster review. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions for a future one, possibly a ace monster for the antagonist, that would be something that we could do maybe later on. I'll have to see with that though, because once again, I don't really know. It seems like in different anime seasons, even if it's like the same protagonist, it seems like the antagonists are a little bit different, so I'll have to see. But if you're interested in hearing about that, please let me know in the comment section below, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.